So, Jeff, you had a long ride. Where'd you come from?
Well, I just came from the town of Kingsburg, California, where my wife and I and our two daughters have been living for probably 30 or 35 years, I think.
In Kingsburg?
Yeah.
Yeah. And I see you did some damage to your leg. Old age, huh?
Well, in the last year, I've had some serious surgery challenges. I had the total knee replacement in the left knee last year, and then just recently in June I had the other one done.
Is that working for you?
It's going.
It's
all
a tough
right.
road.
You're right.
Yeah, and I've done this before. I've done the physical therapy. I had a tumor removed
Oh, all right.
from my
Okay.
spinal cord.
Oh, boy.
So yeah, I was like paralyzed. I mean, I went through a lot of stuff.
No,
but I understand the pain and suffering
Well,
of the recovery.
thank you. Yeah.
Yeah. You're a very interesting and educated person. Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself? Tell me about your education and all that good stuff.
Well, no, thank you, Pat, very much. I'm honored and
I am
privileged to be here this afternoon. I thank you for the chance here. I guess I've had a somewhat curious, circuitous route to where I've come to be in this position here. The motivation started probably when I was in Africa in the Peace Corps.
Oh yeah.
I was a Peace Corps volunteer in the southern Central African country of Botswana, which is very much like the southern San Joaquin Valley in terms of its flatness,
Is that right?
its lack of rain, and just the vegetation was very similar there. And the people are really wonderful, kind-hearted people. I was a teacher there, and I made the decision at that time to come back and remediate myself in agricultural sciences, and eventually I wanted to return to international ag development work. But I went first for a year at Fresno State, then a year at Cal Poly San Luis Obispo, and then I was a student for my master's and Ph.D. degrees up at UC Davis. And I was lucky enough to get a job in the very department that I studied in, the Department of Plant Sciences at Davis. So I became even earlier, before I graduated, what was called a cooperative extension specialist, and I'm now a professor and a cropping systems specialist doing research in many places throughout the Central Valley, and also in the Salinas Valley through the Department of Plant Sciences at UC Davis. So my assignment is very broad, very flexible. I'm to work on cropping systems and work with farmers and other parties to help improve the performance of those kind of production systems.
Yeah, I did a lot of looking and deep diving into you, and you are an interesting person, whether you know it or not. You are. You're all over the place. I mean, you've done a lot of things in all these years, and you should be commended for that. You're peer reviewed.
Well, no, but that's part of the process of science and the expectations.
Well, that's what I mean. A lot of people spout stuff, and they aren't peer reviewed.
Oh no, all right, but no,
that's what I'm. Yeah.
It is that part of the work and the job is very important, and we're accountable for generating information that is scientifically robust and sound, and that goes through the peer review process. So, yeah, writing up what we've done has been a big part of what we're expected to do.
Absolutely. You've been awarded some awards too. You're a pretty modest guy. Wow. You've got some awards here, and yeah.
No, but what I'd like, just Pat, I guess we should define it a little bit. It's the work group. What I'd like to talk with you, it is a group of people that has really been, in many ways, inspirational. It involves lots and lots of farmers here locally in the San Joaquin Valley, lots of private sector partners, and university, government, agency, USDA, NRCS colleagues that are in part of this. But it really has been an exciting trajectory of work and goal setting that we've had. And I'll just give you an example of why I'm really proud of this. In 2012, we had a formal public launching in the Clovis Veterans Center of the CASI, C-A-S-I, Conservation Agriculture Systems Innovation Center, which we all are part of there.
Yeah.
And there were probably 250 people there, and one of the private sector guys insisted that before we had that program on a given day, that we met in his motel room just across the street from the
Yeah,
Veterans
I know what
Building.
that is, yeah.
And that we practiced our speeches for the next day.
Oh,
He was
God.
that concerned and insistent, and we all did. We were all crowded in his little.
Well, you're academics, I
Well,
mean, that's
but
what you guys do.
That's what we do, but there were other people on the program, and he wanted to make sure that we were all.
Yeah, everybody was in sync
giving
with
a
it.
good message. So it was that kind of commitment, I guess, and dedication that I'm really happy about.
What I like to do is, I like to do an atmosphere, and you'll feel it, all this goes away, you know, but I like to do the kitchen table talk.
All right.
You know, and that's what people like and want and everything, and, you know, and you know, it's an honest thing. I want to get into a part of your studies. You have I guess a field out on 5 Points.
Yep.
Okay,
Yep.
that you do a lot of study work. How many acres is that?
Well, we have a long-standing, and it's a very unique
Yeah.
study in 5 Points at the University of California Field Station.
Yeah.
And the study is 8 full acres. It's a small site compared to large-scale farms.
Well, it's a
of course.
study center.
But we've had this in place since 1998.
Yeah.
We actually began in that year. And over the course of, 21 years or so, we've been documenting, monitoring, measuring, and observing what has happened to the performance of those systems, the soil, a lot of different attributes, physical, chemical, biological attributes of the systems that we've been evaluating. So they're basically 4 farming systems, and we're talking about annual crops,
Okay.
like the row crops or
Yeah,
the
row
field
cropping,
crops, not
yeah,
permanent
not trees,
or
yeah.
vines or those kind
Yeah,
of things.
right.
So it's an annual crop rotation. We started with tomatoes and cotton, which are very important in that
Yeah,
region, and still
Boswell,
are.
yeah, Calcott, yeah.
You're right, and then we diversified a little bit as the project went on there. But we've tried to compare what we call standard tillage, the normal intercrop tillage and working the soil that farmers do.
We called it disking.
Yeah, you're right.
Okay,
You're
back
absolutely right.
in,
Yep.
you know, back in our, you
Yep.
know, my young days, it went from plow, and then we call it disc,
Yep,
okay,
yep, you're
which was just a disc.
Yep, you're right. No,
Okay,
California row crop farmers, they don't tend to use plows very often. It's
Right.
the disc. So you're absolutely right
Yeah,
about that.
yeah.
So that was the first system or treatment, the conventional tillage. So reworking the beds, incorporating the residue, all that kind of input that went into the system. Then we would add a cover crop to that system, a green manure cover crop that we'd let grow in the wintertime. It would capture sunlight, energy, and add organic matter to the system. Then we had 2 other systems. One was a no-till system, where we absolutely didn't do any of the
Now, what
tillage.
year was that when you were doing this?
Well, right at the beginning, 1998 or
Okay,
99.
okay.
So right from the beginning, we started with the no-till system. And then the 4th system was the complementary no-till with the winter cover crops. So we
Yeah,
had
4.
standard till, no-till, without, and with cover crops for a total of 4 systems. And to cut to the chase in terms of what we've seen, it took about 8 years for us to see any changes. I think that's an honest assessment there. We weren't bewildered by that. We knew that things take time, and a lot
Right.
of processes are slow in developing. But after about 8 years, and even more recently now, we've seen some dramatic changes in a lot of attributes, and I can
Right.
talk about
Oh, we will.
many of those if you want. Yeah.
Yeah, let's get into 2016. I found that really interesting, because what you did was, and I read all about what you did in your paper, and I don't know what you call it, thesis or whatever you did, but you guys, you got your customer base, your farming base, and you sent out a detailed questionnaire to all these farmers. And I'm going by memory here,
Yeah.
okay, so correct me if I'm wrong. 24% of them came back to you.
Okay.
That's what the paper said.
No, that's all right. Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds about close.
All right. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, and which I thought was very high. Okay,
Wow.
I'm serious. I went, wow, they got 24. I mean, I'm reading and I'm thinking, as I'm reading this, I'm like, 24% seems pretty. They did good. You guys probably went, oh, we should have got like 75. But I mean, 24 is pretty good from when because I know the farmers, right? And then you went from there.
Well, all right. So you're referring to a study that was done, there was a student at UC Davis, a master's student, and she did a very broad survey.
Yeah.
And I forgot the details of that, but it was really asking the question, what are some of the barriers, what are some of the roadblocks or the hang-ups to why, more of these reduced disturbance production systems, techniques or practices have not been taken up in California. Whereas in the Midwest, in cotton, for instance, in Tennessee, 85% of the cotton is grown no-till.
Yeah,
all
yeah,
right?
yeah,
And
yeah.
in corn and soybeans, there's a hearty percentage of cropland in the Midwest, 45%, that uses these kind of reduced disturbance
Absolutely.
practices. So her question was, why are there barriers to having these systems in California? And one of the tools she used was a survey, along with interviews and everything, and it was quite elucidating in terms of what she found there. But that was a small,
Okay. Yeah.
long ago part of the whole process there. We've learned a little bit. There are lots of barriers and difficulties that farmers face in lock, stock, and barrel just adopting or taking on really stripped down, reduced disturbance systems.
Okay.
The systems that have developed in California, since the time of irrigation, way back in 1930, when people
Flood.
started pumping
Yeah.
groundwater and everything, they're well developed. They've led to the phenomenal productivity that California's cropping systems are well known for, and that have made several counties within 50 miles of here, the top 7 or so counties in the whole country there, in terms of ag productivity. So there are good reasons why the tillage practices that were developed many, many decades ago in the 20th century are still used by and large, and that other reduced disturbance practices are difficult to integrate into those systems there. It's not easy. It's not without risk. There are economic risks that people face. But as our long-term study has shown,
Yeah. Yeah.
the trade-offs or the balances or the benefits that might come out of those systems
Yeah.
in terms of reducing emissions, like
Right.
dust emissions, by 75%,
Yeah, that's big.
by increasing structure of the soil, by increasing the water holding capacity of the soil, by increasing the movement and infiltration of water into the soil. And at a certain shallow depth anyway, we've seen increases in soil carbon or organic matter, not throughout the whole profile, but in the top 15 centimeters or 6 inches there. So it's a question probably of trade-offs for sure, the economic risks, the fact that equipment hasn't existed in California except in recent years.
You mean the tillage equipment?
Well, the reduced tillage equipment,
Yeah, I'm
the
sorry.
no-till
Yeah,
planters, the
absolutely.
no-till drills,
Yeah.
the strip-tillers, and I know you've talked with Kerry Crum in the
Yeah.
private sector
Yeah.
for one of your interviews. He's very active with a lot of very innovative farmers to develop the wherewithal and the capacity in the farmer community
Right.
to do these reduced disturbance practices at large scale now. So that's really an exciting thing that's happened here. And I think we've had an important, maybe a small role in getting the information about improvements, and trade-offs, and benefits and costs of these systems
Yeah.
that support some of the rationale for why people might be interested in changing.
Yeah, you did some really interesting studies. Yeah, in this study, and it was funny too, because they had the comebacks, and these farmers, they're gonna come back at you, you ask these questions, and one was, well, my neighbor tried to do it and it didn't work out that well. And it was like, okay, wait a minute. And I know farmers very well. How much did you manage what they did?
All right, so
Yeah.
that's an interesting observation, and let me
Yeah.
just give you a little bit of the history. All right, in 2004, our work group did another kind of a survey, and it was determined at that point that about less than half of 1% of the annual cropland acreage, field and row crops in the
Okay.
Central Valley, were using these kind of conservation or reduced disturbance tillage practices. That's less than 1%.
Oh, okay, what
In-
years are we talking
All right.
about when you said that?
That was right at the beginning of this century,
Okay, go
2004.
Okay,
Then by 2012, so
Right.
8 years later,
right,
in the dairy silage sector, where they're growing winter triticale or oats or wheat, and then followed by corn generally,
sure.
it was over 45%. that were using either strip-till or no-till. So that's a phenomenal increase in the scale or the acreage. That is kind of a unique example, and it was a very likely one to happen. It was low-hanging fruit in some ways because, you know, to grow no-till or strip-till corn, it's pretty straightforward.
Right.
People are doing that all over the country, frankly. But it took that much time, and thanks to a lot of different partners, including many, many very innovative and progressive, forward-looking farmers, to start that. And your story about, you know, somebody reporting that they saw somebody fail,
Yeah.
there were many of those kind of stories happening at that time. And they used to call it, for instance, trash farming. Farmers, when they didn't plow or they didn't disc,
Yeah.
they didn't incorporate the residue from the prior
Correctly,
crops,
yeah.
it would look trashy.
Yeah.
And that was the, you know, the name that nickname they were given at that point. So
Yeah.
so there were many stories like that, and people would turn their backs on the practice and say, well, nah, I don't think that's going to work for me. I remember bringing a machine. It was either a planter, a no-till planter, or a strip-till machine that allows for reduced disturbance planting up to a farm up near I-5 a long time ago. And before I even got out of the truck,
Yeah.
the guy came up to me and he said, well, that's not going to work.
Yeah, I've heard that
And no, and we ended up unloading it with the forklift and everything. But
Yeah.
you know, mindset is very, very important in a lot of this stuff.
Oh, yeah.
I know that sounds like a simple, trivial kind of a take on the whole thing, but to have the flexibility of the mind, and my mentor, a guy back in South Dakota, his name is Dwayne Beck, he's probably had more impact on cropping systems improvement in our country than anybody I know.
Dwayne Beck,
Yeah, he's been he is fond of saying, you almost need a brain transplant to make the changes that are important to do these kind of things.
Because it's a complete,
It's a systems orientation, and again, to come back to Kerry, when you
Yeah.
talk
Oh,
with
yeah.
him there, that's what he's doing. He's
Yeah.
out there right now, working with people and setting up the systems awareness and the importance of when you change one thing, a lot of other things need to come into play and change
Right.
as well there. So it's not an easy path, but there are now people that are taking that on. I could tell you about a completely different
Sure.
group
Go.
that, you know, we mentioned the kind of the success story of the dairy silage
Yeah.
production. There also have been people in the tomato arena,
Uh-huh.
both fresh market and processing
Oh, yeah.
tomatoes, who have done similar things. They've added winter cover crops into their system. They've reduced disturbance tillage before transplanting tomatoes, and that's kind of another case example of that. The last one that I'll give you here this afternoon, Pat, is we're currently working with a very good group of very, very experienced organic vegetable farmers, including some people here in Madera County, over near Hollister, California, and up in Meridian and Gwinda in Northern California, north of Sacramento. These folks are pretty much state-of-the-art in terms of the systems that they've developed over the last 40 years. Very, very experienced. They know what they're doing, and,
Yeah.
and it's been an exciting opportunity to work with them. Well, they're now trying to take on the challenge of, okay, how do we do these reduced disturbance practices in an organic, high-value vegetable cropping system? And it is not at all easy. They have had many, many challenges that have come up there. In terms of, you know, how do you kill cover crops after you grow cover crops to get organic matter into the soil? You can't use an herbicide, so how do you do that either mechanically or biologically?
Yeah, they kind of have to.
That's right.
Yeah, on their own.
And also,
Yeah.
how do you get fertility into the soil to make sure that your vegetables are going to grow there? So there's been progress there, but it's been also quite difficult to get to where we are right now with their systems.
Yeah, my lineage goes back 80 years of farming and everything, and there's one thing I know about farmers.
Yeah.
They were all nice guys.
Yeah.
And nice guys get grifted. And they got grifted so much in all these years. They are so hard.
Yeah.
You know, it's like it's deaf ears because they had to turn off because they were getting grifted so bad.
Well,
And plus it's the hardest game in the world. As you know, the environment's trying to kill you. You know, the price, everything is just, it's the hardest thing to do. And that's when my hat goes off to these people, you know.
Yeah.
You know, my dad, I didn't even know my dad until I was 8 years old because he worked all the time.
Yeah.
You know, but that's what you were.
No, I mean, the struggles, and I know many of these folks very personally and
Yeah.
as friends and everything, and particularly these days with water and the shortages and the implications of all that. It is very, very severe, and it's a tremendous hardship, and we know all of that. And
Yeah,
it's a
yeah.
very hard thing that people are going through, in addition to all the other challenges that you mentioned.
Yeah.
And plus the expectations, there's the public in some ways, and I know several of these folks have actually made an effort to point out to public agency people that, this is not easy. The expectations about all these changes and everything and improvements, it's not without risk, and it's not without economic loss and the potential loss on our parts
Right.
as farmers there. So it is, that's why I learned, hopefully early on, and I try to always remember this, that there's livelihoods that are at stake, and
Oh,
all
yeah.
these kind of things there.
Oh, there's big money on the
Well,
line.
that's right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And yeah, so the academic community is trying. It's a hard push because you're saying, look, we understand this, and now you have to understand this too.
Yeah, no.
And we have to partner and everything, and it's coming along pretty good. It now. I mean, it's taken a long time. You
Well,
know.
no, I agree, and they're really phenomenal and very, very exciting, innovative things that so many good farmers and ranchers have been doing and
Yeah.
are doing, and it's inspirational to have been a small part of that stuff, and to know and to see and to be able to document some of the progression, I think, in the changes here, because there's a lot of very good work that's out there happening. Yeah.
Yeah, your ride has been very long. You just didn't go, look, we got this, you need to do this.
No.
It's been a long sales process. And they've said, a farmer will tell you, hey, if I listen to everybody, I'd never get that thing done in my life.
Yeah.
So, you're giving them questionnaires expecting, they'll all fill them out and they'll come in. And it's like the guy looks at it and goes, I don't have time for this.
I can give you another
Yeah.
story that,
Sure.
I think backward. There's a young farmer that I know, and he's here locally, and I remember being invited to him, and we sat down in his living room one day, and he told me about his father who was the farmer prior, and he had received a government incentive contract to make some changes in their farm. And this particular farmer said, I'm now strapped with the obligation of implementing these things. Can you help me out? And so he was kind of in a bind. He had to honor the contract, but it turned out one of the most successful ventures or endeavors that I've ever been a part of. The guy was extremely persistent. He ended up making phenomenal changes in terms of tillage reduction in
Right.
his dairy silage production system. And I remember on a Saturday morning, we were down on our hands and knees looking for seed and seeing if it was in good contact with the soil and the water and everything. And a little bit later, he called me up and he said, "Hey, Jeff, do you know what we're doing?" And I said, what do you mean? What are we doing? And he said, "We're completely changing the production paradigms
Whoa.
in part of the valley here." And I said, "Well, my goodness, in some ways I think you're right. It sounds like a grandiose kind of a statement
Yeah.
there, but it was kind of people like him who had the temerity and the tenacity to do these things and to get down and pay attention to the details and make it work."
Right.
And then later on, other people came in as supporters and to help the whole process there. Yeah.
Now, was that in row crop?
Yeah, that was in dairy silage and
Dairy.
corn and winter triticale. Yeah.
Dairies, they've got to do a lot because there's a lot of people to feed meat to and to milk cows. And I was watching this thing and the guy says, well, who drinks milk nowadays? And it's like, drink milk? I mean, milk's involved in a lot of stuff. You just don't drink it. Okay.
No, I'm with you.
Yeah. It's like, man, that's an uneducated comment. It's like they got. Well, I just drove through the San Joaquin Valley, and it looked like poverty and stuff. It's like, you don't really understand what's going on, and people don't. They
No,
drive through town, yeah,
Speaking of that, there's another
Yeah.
dairy guy that I know. He's up near Turlock there. He just told me that he's 80 years old, and he was
Whoa.
one of the first people in California
yeah,
to take these production practices, the reduced disturbance, conservation, tillage, and everything on. He was extremely with it. He used to go back to the Midwest, some of the farmer meetings in January of every year, with the no-till and the strip-till meetings there, and he learned a lot there. He later presented what he's doing at those meetings out in California here. But I remember, just recently, I got a call from a farmer friend of mine who was visiting some other farmers in Colorado, and they were out in the field, on the spot, trying to get the planter organized, the tools adjusted and everything. And they called me up and they said, do you have any advice for what we should do about getting the seed in the ground, to get enough pressure to push it into the soil? And I gave them some ideas, and then I said, well, listen, I'm gonna send you the contact information for my good friend in Turlock. He ended up calling them within a few minutes, and they had a 45-minute conversation, and he gave all of his personal hard-earned
Yeah,
experience with that,
yeah.
and he
Oh,
just loved
that's a
it.
big deal.
No, it was very important, and
Yeah.
not that other people around the country couldn't have done it, but it was an example of somebody here locally, just in
Right.
Turlock, that has developed the experience and the wherewithal to really make dramatic changes in the way that they're growing the silage
In
for their
Colorado.
dairy. No, here in Turlock.
Oh.
He's a dairyman in Turlock,
Oh,
but he
oh.
was helping on the phone
Yeah.
the folks in Colorado.
Yeah. Yeah, that's imparting information that people don't usually get.
No, you're right. Yeah.
Yeah, that's big time. Yeah, people don't understand it, and the work that academically is done to help the farmers, it's an untold secret.
Well, thank you very much. And
Yeah.
I know there are lots of really dedicated and good, productive researchers that are involved with many parts of what we've been doing there. But no, I agree with you. I think that
Yeah.
the science work in conjunction with the demonstration evaluations and the improving of the production techniques, it's all important part of the process there. One of the farmers up north, one of the organic vegetable farmers that I talked about earlier, he's had research done at their farm with many people, and it's just outstanding information that has come from comparing his system after now 40 years of
Yeah,
dedicated management that he has compared to the standard or traditional or conventional system. And there's some very important outcomes that have been elucidated by that research that are important in terms of pest management, in terms of nutrient cycling, in terms of tightening the cycling and reducing losses
Mhm.
down into the groundwater from the systems there. So it is important work, and we need, I think, that kind of monitoring and validation. Otherwise, it's
Right.
just,
yeah. California's been a long road. I was looking at the percentages, and I saw 37% in California of tillage overall. Does that sound close, or?
well, I mean, it depends. It depends on this cropping system and the sector there. I remember being at a meeting a long time ago.
Yeah.
And I was talking about some of this work here, and a gentleman in the back of the room raised his hand and said, "Hey, buddy, we've been doing no-tillage for many years." And I was a little
Yeah.
bit surprised. And I
Really?
said, well, do you mind if I ask what cropping system you have? And he said,
Yeah.
yeah, oranges. So in orange
Oranges.
groves, in oranges, they don't do any tillage there.
No.
So I have to be careful in knowing the audience and
Yeah.
knowing who I'm speaking to. But in general, permanent crops, over the years, there used to be disking, as you said earlier,
Yeah.
done in some orchards and some vineyards there. There's much less in my understanding right now.
Sure.
But in the annual cropping systems that we've dealt with for 30 years now, let me think about this. Again, I told you at the turn of the century, 2004,
Yeah.
less than 0.5% of San Joaquin Valley farmers for tomatoes, cotton, sorghum, wheat, triticale, corn, the main beans, various sorts, less than 0.5% were using these kind of practices in general. So that's a very small percentage. And it's gone up and it's changed in
Yeah.
some cropping sector, but it's not the dominant paradigm by any stretch yet, yeah.
A lot is our topography.
Well, no, because I think
Flat?
yeah, most of the valley
Yeah,
floor
yeah.
is flat.
Yeah,
so
that's
we
what I
have-
mean,
so
opposed
it-
to
and-
rolling hill.
That's right,
Yeah.
and so and also I think in California we have the idea that erosion is not that big of a concern right here.
Oh, it's big.
But we don't, there is wind erosion and
Yeah.
everything, but general soil loss to erosion like we know about in the Midwest and
Yeah.
in South America,
Yeah,
that kind of a driver, that was what spurred many farmers in Argentina, Brazil, Paraguay, Indiana, Illinois, Iowa, Kansas, and South Dakota and everything to make changes. That was to reduce soil loss and erosion. The other thing that motivated a lot of those farmers that has not been that important in California is that when you reduce disturbance of the soil, you reduce plowing and disking, and you keep the soil covered by a layer of mulch or residue, you cool the soil and you reduce soil water evaporation,
sure.
thereby storing or conserving more water in the soil that can go to the next crop. In the Midwest, in South Dakota, I remember talking with a farmer, and he said that if we hadn't made these changes, we would have been out of business.
Is that
And he-
right?
in the early 1990s, the conventional thing was called summer fallow. A farmer would grow a crop this year, but next year they would have to fallow or leave the soil abandoned to
Jeez.
capture rainfall to grow a crop again in the third year.
Oh.
It was a dead end in terms of productivity and
Oh, yeah.
economics. They were literally going bankrupt there.
And where was
Well,
that at?
Well, that was in South Dakota.
Right, right.
And it is part of the history back there that they developed the wherewithal to grow and intensify and diversify the cropping so that they're now growing crops every year there.
Yeah.
And that's pretty much saved them by preserving residue, keeping the soil in place, keeping the water in place,
Right.
protecting the water from soil water evaporation. So it's not surprising. And we've seen the same kind of a thing here. Those farmers back there, by doing no-till and residue preservation techniques, they probably are saving 4 or 5 inches of rain water in the soil
Wow.
per year. We've seen the same thing in our 5-point study.
That's big here.
That's about 16% of the annual crop water use of an annual crop.
That's what Kerry was telling me.
It's not a huge amount, but it's not trivial either. But it so far hasn't tipped the balance of interest or motivation toward these kind of practices. It's hard. It's not
I
easy
know.
to do these things.
Yeah, it's a sell.
Yeah, but and or to take the risks to do these
Yeah.
things. So that's where the trade-offs come in.
Yeah, I've seen some interesting numbers, but and I imagine these were through the years and everything of different countries.
Yeah.
Australia, they seem to be really innovative on what they do.
Well, I mean, I know a little bit about it. I've been there a couple times there, and I know
Yeah.
particularly from the processing tomato industry, which has now vanished, I think. They've gone out of business because
Yeah,
of
they were in
the
cotton
water.
and stuff.
But I don't know the extent of conservation or reduced disturbance tillage, frankly, in all of Australia there. That's
Yeah.
an interesting thing. I should know that. But part of Australia is the island of Tasmania, and there is a lot of innovation down there,
Yeah.
in some of these vegetable systems. I know I've been down there to see what that looks like and
Yeah.
everything. And I would have to say that probably not worldwide, but in many other parts of the world that I could, in China, for instance, I have a friend who is leading the conservation tillage efforts throughout all of China, frankly, in all the provinces and
Really?
everything. And India, there are similar kinds of things. There's a conservation agriculture work group through the continent of Africa. In Europe, there are things so there are a lot of things going on in
All over the
many
world.
places.
Yeah.
But I would say, the Midwest for sure, the southeast of the United States, Georgia and
That's what
Alabama.
it looks like, yeah.
That's where some of this started 30, 40 years ago. And then some of the expertise was then transferred down to South America, where farmers themselves actually pushed their government agencies, like the universities and the USDA, the equivalent down in those countries, to confront the erosion issue that they had.
Oh,
And
yeah.
so that it kind of snowballed then, and they became more on the no-till bandwagon there. So there are hot spots around, and the same thing happened in California. When I talked, when I mentioned earlier the dairy silage sector, it was really exciting and interesting to know and to communicate what's happening in Chowchilla or something.
Oh, yeah,
And,
yeah.
and down in Hanford and everything. And so, I'm not trying to say that it's completely dominating the production system now, but there have been dramatic changes that have happened.
They had to.
Yeah, well, and the other side of all of this is we're not at all talking about the economics, but if you can,
Let's, I mean.
well, but if you can reduce the tillage operations, all right, the disking, the recreation of beds, the ripping of the soil, the mulching of the soil that goes on in between many annual cropping sequences. Again, this doesn't sound like a lot, and it is not a major part of a California row crop budget, but across a lot of different sectors, $150 per acre of savings per year.
Yeah,
But that's
an average.
That's
yeah.
right, but that's because tillage tends to be a very small part of the production budget, all right? The seed is expensive, for a tomato farmer, they have to pay for seed, they have to pay for pest management, all kinds of other things.
Yeah.
So the budget might be $3,500 and only $150 of that is related to tillage. So,
Yeah.
so
They
the
don't see-
economics in it
yeah.
haven't favored these kind of changes. Whereas maybe more in the dairy silage sector, it's been more of a
You can see,
driver.
yeah,
That's
you can
right.
see. Well, with energy costs going up ×3,
Yeah.
with fertilizer, nitrogen going up ×3, I mean, they're gonna have to do other things.
Well, I mean, I think there is
Those-
probably some
those numbers are
likelihood
gonna
of
go
that.
up.
That's
that
right.
you're
Yeah, I
talking
would think
about.
so. And I think, again, if just to look at the fertility or the nutrient aspects of what you just said there, Pat, if people can capture carbon and take advantage of atmospheric nitrogen in the form of cover crops and compost amendment applications there, and cycle nutrients in a very tight way there, that is probably going to be part of the future of fertility management that we're looking at
That's
in
what
some
I
of these
see.
sectors. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what, I see, making food better.
Yeah.
These whole foods and, all these, specialty items and everything, and making them less pest resistant and all this other stuff. I imagine tillage is gonna be a big part of that.
Well,
I hope so.
Well, again, from the economics again,
Yeah.
it's hard to
I know, yeah.
it's hard not to look at the potential savings.
Yeah.
$150, that's out there, and it's, you leave it on the table or you try to develop the changes in what you're doing
Right.
to achieve that. The other part of it is, the California, by and large, in many annual cropping systems, there have been high production costs. So that's just a fact of the matter there.
Right.
And as you just pointed out, there are reasons that are indicating that they're going to even, continue increasing without question there. But so I think there is probably an inevitability that these kinds of reduced disturbance systems, from the economics, from the soil, physical, biological, and chemical benefits that derive from them. We haven't talked about soil biology so much here yet, but we have seen some dramatic changes, or the team of researchers that I work with, in terms of the organisms and the composition, the abundance of organisms, everything from nematodes to fungi to bacteria in the soil there that did not change probably dramatically very quickly, but now after 22 years there, we've, again, some of the publications have documented that they may be associated with with what is called resilience, the ability of the system or the soil to bounce back or recoup from
Right. Yeah, it's
perturbations.
broken down.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's from what I understand, and that's what you're seeing now.
Well, that brings us to a very important point,
Yeah,
I think, here, that is that I don't want to be too over the top here or too provocative here, but because we have seen now and measured and documented and monitored some pretty striking changes in soil function that I've just tried to lay out here
Yeah.
in the last few minutes here. I wonder at some points if there's a retired NRCS guy, his name is Ray Archuleta.
Now, what is those acronyms? What is that?
NRCS stands for Natural Resource Conservation Service. It's the
Okay.
part of the USDA,
Okay.
Department of Agriculture. And NRCS is charged with implementing the Farm Bill, for instance, and getting government conservation programs out on the land there. So each county in California, or most of them, have an NRCS office, and they're doing work of the U.S. Department of Agriculture. Well, Ray Archuleta used to be part of the Soil Health Division of NRCS in North Carolina, and I remember him making presentations and showing slides that would say something like, what we're dealing with is really a degraded resource. We no longer recognize what good functioning soil is, because we've lost that.
Yeah.
And because we, in our own research, in the 20-year study in 5 points, have seen some very striking changes and improvements in soil function,
Okay. Yeah.
you know, you have to scratch your head and wonder a little bit if we haven't become used to working with a degraded resource in what we
Is that right?
are farming these days. I know that sounds provocative here, but I think there might be something to that,
That's interesting.
yeah.
That's really interesting. Well, we got this takes time.
Well, no,
Right? Things-
that's for sure. In fact,
Yeah.
a lot of people, because of the kind of work we do, and you know, there are probably and linkages between these kinds of practices that we've been talking about the last few minutes here, and conservation and reducing emissions and the whole environmental benefits that
Right.
could derive from that, and also climate change mitigation and what we hear about that. So we get asked the question a lot about you know, are these practices leading toward greater carbon storage in the soil? And I really have to be very, very careful what I say in response to that kind of a question, because the science, and this has developed and evolved very dramatically over the last decade or 10
Right.
years particularly, but what it is showing in general is that it is very hard to store carbon in the soil resulting from agricultural management practices. It takes long periods of time, first of all. It takes complete dedication and not interrupting those kind of practices like reduced disturbance, like cover cropping, like adding organic amendments and compost and manure. But even because the soil biology, the microbes in the soil need something to eat,
Right.
and they're eating carbon derived from crop and cover crop residues, it turns out that the cycling of carbon and nitrogen and nutrients and elements in the soil biology may be changed, but the actual so-called sequestration or storage of carbon may not be as changeable. And we've actually, and that's something that I have to be careful when talking about.
You mean it may not be able to replace
It may not be something that farmers can readily
replace quick
and add to by
Right.
their practices. That's right. So
Right.
the general dogma would be, okay, let's use farmland to store more carbon, to sequester carbon in the soil. And that, you know, that sounds good, and that has lots of followers and lots of believers, I think, in doing that. Our own work has shown very modest increases, and again, only in the top 6 inches
Right.
of soil.
Topsoil, yeah.
They're significant, they're not gigantic or huge, but they come from, you know, 20 years of dedicated cover cropping and no-till management.
Yeah, it takes a long time.
That's right, and it's the systems themselves. You know, if we talked about the early on failures and challenges that we had in growing crops with these practices, we failed. We failed the first 3 or 4 years just getting a stand of cotton. We didn't know how to do it, and you know, after a while, the conservation tillage system cotton yields were equal for many years to the standard till. So you can learn and you refine the systems and the ability to implement them, but it is a long duration thing. You need to keep it thinking that carbon is cycling rather than being sequestered in the soil.
Yeah.
So it's not a simple, clear-cut kind of a solution. I
Well,
don't
not
think.
scientifically anyway. I mean, and that's what you do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, because otherwise, we get carried away by hype, and we get carried away by exaggeration
Yeah, yeah,
and
yeah.
claims that may not be real.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
you gotta be very careful of
Well-
all that. Because people, hey, you don't know what you're talking about.
Well,
You
No,
know.
and that is out there too.
I know,
and,
I
and
know.
that because I don't want to say that we're in desperate times, but we're in critically important times for reversing some of these things. I
Because of
believe
the
science-
carbon issue.
Well, and emissions and the gases that are leaving the ground into the atmosphere. So there is a reason for all of this that is indisputable, I believe. But we got to be careful that we not exaggerate the opportunities for changing that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
You know, like, we're gonna be dead tomorrow because,
Or-
yeah, you know, you can't.
Or
Yeah.
that farmers have the obligation of storing carbon in the soil. It's not quite that simple.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, 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 yeah. So, what are you working on now? What's important?
Well, good question.
Yeah.
I am currently, just 2 days ago, on Tuesday of this week, one of our farmers in our work group, Tom Willey, a farmer up in Madera County, he was in Denver, Colorado for this Soil and Water Conservation Society meeting. And not only did he report on what is going on with the organic farmer group that we're working with, but he also received the Conservation Innovation Award for this
Yeah,
year
yeah.
on behalf of our work group. So it was a very nice honor that Tom took on behalf of many of us here in
Yeah.
California. So the group that he's part of, though, it's called a CIG, Conservation Innovation Grant. And it's a grant from the U.S. Department of Agriculture. And it is allowing us a group of many farmers, over 120 affiliates or people who are paying attention to what we're doing. That's that group of very experienced long-term organic farmers who are trying to work to reduce disturbance in their systems.
Right.
So just to name drop a little bit, there's a farmer over in Hollister, Phil Foster. Scott Park is up in the Sacramento Valley in Meridian, California. Paul Muller and Andrew Brait are up in the Capay Valley in the north there. So a variety of farms, but that is a very stimulating, a very progressive group, and I've been fortunate enough to be part of that project along with many other partners on that. The other side project that I'm almost embarrassed to tell you about,
Yeah,
Pat, is
yeah.
that I spend an inordinate amount of time myself. It's in some ways it's a very work-intensive project because it takes me drive time to go through about 40 different farms every week here in the San Joaquin
You
Valley.
drive that much?
Well, they're not too far away.
Yeah.
They're close, but
Okay.
it takes and what I do is I take ground level camera and mobile phone images, and then we analyze those on the computer, and then I take drone images, and then we have some colleagues down at the University of California at Riverside, and also up at UC Davis, who get satellite, image,
Yeah,
remote sensing
yeah.
images and everything. And so what we're looking at, Pat, in a nutshell, is the extent to which the core 4 principles of soil health are actually being implemented across the board at a variety of different farms in California. And the 4 principles we're talking about
Sure.
are reducing disturbance, all right, so is there a lot of tillage disturbance, preserving residue over the soil surface.
Okay.
So we can detect that through photographic techniques there and analysis there. Is there evidence of living roots? We're not worried about that too much, but is there green cover? Are there plants growing on the landscape, in the soil, for as much of the year, for as many days throughout the year as possible? So what, through the drone, the ground level truthing camera images, and the satellite remote sensed images, what we're trying to come up with is some kind of a chronicling or an estimate of the number of days that there's green vegetation growing, as evidence of farms that are trying to increase organic matter and improve soil health there, but also surface residue cover. So it's kind of a descriptive, documentary kind of a study here, but it has taken because I've had to learn a lot of the techniques and the drone analysis and the image analysis.
FDA,
and the permissions that are involved in
Oh,
the
yeah,
FAA. Yeah, you're right.
yeah.
We fly a couple of fields up over by the Lemoore Naval Air Station. So every week,
no-fly zone.
I have to but every week I have an authorization there, but I have to call 3 days ahead of time.
Yeah.
I have to call half an hour ahead of time,
Yeah.
and then after I complete the missions, afterwards. So they're for good reason, all right?
Sure.
And I can only fly at 100 feet and everything like that.
Yeah,
But that's another example in addition to the farmer
High-tech.
network work there. Well, it's pushing the limits of my skill set there, but it's been an exciting kind of a project there. Yeah.
How many drones have you crashed?
That's a
That's
a smart question. Because, no, I'm just waiting for a replacement, as a matter of fact.
I know. Well, that's what you do.
Well,
you make
no,
all these. Learning how to fly drones is like learning by mistake.
Well, no, but the university has an outstanding program of educate. They call it drone camp, but it's a full week. I've gone to it twice actually, and it is for people not only in California, across the world. Frankly, they had people tuning in remotely this year, but it is a very rigorous and safety-oriented and rigorous analysis emphasis there. And I've learned a great deal. They're experts in the university that are just phenomenal in terms of their knowledge. Yeah.
So you do these 40 farmer thing. You do it once a week.
I've been trying to stick with that. There are things that come up that I can't do, and that I can't do that. But I do them not only in the San Joaquin Valley, but over at that Hollister farm. That is a unique situation there because that farmer has really taken on the goal of reduced disturbance and residue preservation in ways that are just utterly uncommon.
Is this a young farmer?
No, it's not. He's probably not quite as old as I am.
Yeah,
but
that's big.
He's one of the best farmers that I've ever had the privilege of knowing, and it's not been easy, and he's had setbacks and challenges that are certain and sure, but the dedication and the progress that he's made is just amazing. So I'm lucky enough to monitor, I don't know, maybe 16 of his fields there.
Yeah. So what is the end game of what you're doing? What is that going to do? What do you think it's going to do? Or do you have one?
No, that's a very good question.
Yeah.
All right, let me answer that in the following way. We, as a work group, and we have taken on a rather different set of goals. We actually developed a strategic plan of objectives and things as the work group that involve university, government, private sector, farmer members there. So we've been trying to be somewhat strategic here. We're not bashful about saying that we would like to see the increase in the adoption of what we call and what are globally known as conservation agriculture systems in California.
Okay.
To scale that up. So that would be working with farmers, working with private sector consultants, supporters of production, to create the wherewithal on their parts to scale up successfully the adoption of these, what I call it, improved performance production systems or practices.
Right.
So that's goal number one, I think. I think in a maybe less ambitious kind of a way, I think adding to the process of creating and communicating information to people who will eventually use it from the work that we've conducted in research plots and studies and side by side with farmers, getting that information communicated effectively to people who will be open to using it is a secondary kind of a goal there. And lastly, I think that I have been, if I were to recall the greatest sorts of satisfaction that I personally have had through my work here, it is just working one-on-one individually with different people. And many of them have been farmers. I know that sounds simple and a very personal, emotional kind of a goal or endpoint there, but it has been utterly important and hugely satisfying for me to be part of that. Yeah.
Well, how else do you communicate things if not that?
No, I mean you're right. I mean, but the temptation is that studies and data and research, all of that is so,
Oh.
of so much paramount importance, but there are personal communication things that also enter the picture, I think.
Yeah. So that's your big deal now is the system
Yeah,
that you're creating.
yeah.
Now, do you have a time, a goal that you're going to say, look, I'll have this done in so
Well-
many years, or is this?
Well, believe it or not, we did actually, in our strategic plan as a work group, we did put some target dates in there, and I think, I remember when we crafted the goals of reducing disturbance tillage in annual cropping systems. I remember we did it in a conference call many, many years ago, and we wanted to take some ambitious kind of a target. We didn't want to just cater to the here and now and the status quo. We wanted to sort of set a flag out in an ambitious way there. And we said, well, okay, can we increase the amount of adoption of these systems, reduced disturbance tillage or conservation tillage, which means that you have reduced disturbance by 40 or more % of what you were doing at the turn of the century in 2020, at 2000, the year 2000.
Okay. Yeah,
And
22 years ago.
Could we
Yeah.
scale that up to 40% adoption
That's your goal.
by 2030 or 2025,
Yeah.
I think. So that was a very focused, targeted goal there.
Yeah.
I don't know, looking back, how realistic that has been. I don't think we were wrong in setting goals for not just
Optimistic.
tinkering on the edges. I think
Yeah.
we're right in terms of envisioning and imagining wholesale changes, because people have made them.
Right,
People
right.
have done some amazing, dramatic things, and they're still doing that right
Right.
now. So having ambitious goals was probably a right-headed kind of a thing there. And because, as I told you earlier, the dairy silage sector, they've reached that already.
Yeah,
They've
that's
already
big.
done that. So that's, but not everything is as straightforward, and, there are other, hurdles that have to be negotiated, and that are not without cost, benefit, risk,
You're never going to retire.
potential. No, I'm an old guy, as you can tell here, but again, I have been privileged. I think that, and I still am. I teach classes. That's another thing we didn't touch.
Yeah.
One of the things that I
Yeah. Go
it's
ahead.
taken
Yeah.
the time
No,
for a
go
lot.
ahead.
Is
Let's get into that.
the
a
last
little bit.
17
Yeah.
years, I have been able to teach 2 classes up at UC Davis in the fall. So they usually begin the last week of September.
So where do you stay when you go up?
Well, that's
Yeah.
I usually drive home, so that means I
Oh, you do the round
commute
trip?
every Tuesday and Thursday. I've been doing that for 17
You
years.
drive a lot.
It's very
Yeah.
it's tiring, and my wife says that it's not been good on my knees there.
That's
She's
right.
probably right.
Yeah, your
But
back
anyway, no.
and
So,
knees. Yeah.
but the reason for that, I very much enjoy teaching and preparing to try to do a good job at teaching. But I think it's important, and I think that many of the students, particularly maybe at Davis, who are not coming from ag backgrounds, but who are interested in working eventually in agriculture,
Yeah.
they appreciate the real world kind of a orientation that I'm able to bring there. And I've been, again, very blessed and very fortunate to know lots of people through the years, and to be able to count on many of them to help with my teaching of the students there. And just as I was coming over to record with you this afternoon, a friend of mine said that, yep, we're on for the 29th of September. We're going to go out on a field trip that Thursday afternoon, and I got everything ready for you to. So it's that kind of generosity that I take advantage of, and I, twist people's arms to help with that. But the teaching has been an important part, and I got permission early on. I don't know if I need to disclose this, but from our department chair there, I went into his office and I said, would you mind, or is it okay if I try to make the courses that I'm involved with, that I teach, as real world and applied and as practical as I possibly can?
That's big.
Well, so I got the permission, so there's no turning back. I do what I do.
Yeah. Well,
I think it's been appreciated.
Yeah, you got to get through to the people you're teaching and everything. And
No.
if you know how to do that, you got free reign. I
Well-
mean, why not? You know, it
No,
sounds like.
but
yeah.
there are, no, I mean, there are standards and everything that I certainly, and rules that I have to abide by and everything, but, so that's another thing that, it takes a lot of planning and organization. And for me, I remember, it's kind of a funny story, and maybe this is borne out by our discussion and conversation this afternoon, you and I here, but clarity of communication is probably a paramount, essential trait of good teaching there. And I keep that in mind, and I hope that I can communicate with clarity, and it gives me a good testing and exercise ground with the students to make sure that that's happening.
That's a good thing.
It's very important, I think.
Yeah, communication's big. People are, it's all we got. And we're getting less and less, you know, it's like, I was talking to somebody about some work I wanted to do, and they're like, young person, and they're like, could we just do a Zoom meeting? And I'm like, I don't even want to talk to you now. I mean, I want to talk to somebody face to face. You know, I'm an old time guy. You know, and I'm not that old.
No,
I'm like,
I'm with you in that
yeah.
regard.
I'm like, dude, no. We talk. You know, and that's how I get to know you. And then you show me what you know, and we go from there.
Well,
you know?
no, but that's why I mean, just as an aside here, I'm very fascinated by all the technology and the tools that you have
Yeah.
to prepare and do the podcast, because in the video, I've been an early adopter of video stuff in my own work
Yeah.
and career, and I'm fascinated by it. I think it's obviously a very important form of communication there, and I dabble in videography and getting the techniques right there, so that's why I was very interested in your
Yeah,
side.
this is really, it's been a big road, you know, and again, I was told by farmers, that ain't gonna work.
Oh.
And I was like, and I talked to a big farmer, you know, and he goes, yeah, that's not gonna work. And I went, yeah, it is. And he says, and it's worked, you know.
Good, yeah.
Once you get over 10, it's gonna work. And then people hit a wall at around 7, you know, podcasts,
Right.
long term, you know, long
Oh.
stuff, not these small things. But, you know, I had to learn all this, I had to learn editing, you know, it wasn't no easy road. Then you got the other part of it, which is you gotta find people, you gotta do research, you gotta know what we're talking about, we have to have a fluid discussion as we have, you know, and all that. But I went into agriculture to look at everybody. There's a lot of people doing a lot of different things.
Yeah.
There's your pistachios, your almonds, your row crop, there's dairy, there's everybody in their spread. Everyone's out.
You're right, yeah.
So what I'm doing is I'm bringing everybody into a circle
All right.
where this is going to be a portal. So you go into the portal and you can find whatever you want in there, because you got unsung heroes. You got all these great. I mean, I talk to some great people, and I'm like, how do you know all this? You know, and well, I've been, you know, doing water. This gal, her name's Bedencourt. She's
Yeah,
on the
no.
almond. Yeah, she knows her stuff on water. And I was like, how do you? And she's like, well, how do you find people like that?
Yeah, no, you're right, yeah.
You know, so I'm building a network of people, and it's starting to, you know, pull over, and you know, then the general public starts getting involved, and people start understanding things, because my deal is you can't, you know, everything's grown. It's not, you don't buy it. You know, you go to Walmart and stuff and go, I want this. It's like, do you have any clue what it took to get there?
No.
You know?
I know.
Yeah, and you know, that's pretty much.
Well,
you know.
you're part of the process now of getting information
Oh yeah, I'm a big part.
and understanding out there, yeah.
Yeah, I'm a big part of the process of you know, and everybody I do, they're going, man, you're doing a great thing. It's like, nobody, you know, I had to do this, you know, and it was like, you know, I told people, hey, I love people that tell me I can't do things.
Oh, all right, yeah.
Yeah, I'm one of those guys,
Oh,
you
I
know,
understand.
it's like, tell me you can't, I can't, and I will.
Yeah.
You know, like when I found, see, I was 53, so it was like 7, 8 years ago, and they told me I had a tumor on my spinal cord, and they were like, "You're not going to walk again."
Oh, man.
Oh yeah, I woke up in a different. They screwed up. I mean, it's been a slow growing process. They didn't find it. The medical community. It was just a failure on so many levels. But
Wow.
I mean, they showed me this picture, this MRI, and they went, "Hey," they put dye in me to find it, and that's the only way they found it.
Yeah.
They thought I was pill seeking.
Oh,
Yeah, and
no.
and I had to get around that, and I was in pain and all that. Anyway,
The guy in the bed next to me had this last round. He had something very similar. It
Yeah.
was horrible.
yeah, and they
I'm
told me.
sorry.
Yeah, oh yeah. Well, no, it worked out.
Oh,
I mean,
good job.
Yeah,
Good
they said, "Look, you're gonna be in a hospital bed. You're gonna need care." And I just went, "No, I'm not."
Oh,
And these doctors, neurologists, and everything, "You're gonna have to do this." And I said, "No, man, you don't get it." And they're like, "You really have to accept this." And I'm like, "I'm not going to accept it."
Wow.
And I didn't, and it worked out for
Well,
me.
no, you're lucky. I mean, good job. Good job.
Oh yeah. Well, and that's what it takes. It takes perseverance. People who, no is yes, and I know you've heard a lot of no's.
Well, no, I share your
Yeah.
your experience in that regard, and
Yeah.
you're absolutely right. There have been a lot of times where you hear discouraging,
Yeah.
pessimistic sorts of comments there, and yet, the other side of it comes back to that third thing that I talked with you about earlier, that
Mhm.
the personal satisfaction of people who do have the ambition and
Oh, yeah.
the mindset and the openness to just make things work. And that has been, I don't want to say the salvation, but that's been the great privilege of that I've had, and it's kept me going a lot of times. Yeah, because working with people that are just can-do people, they're going to make things work, and they do make things
Yeah.
work. And that's been I could just list one after another of those kind of relationships that I've been fortunate to have, and that I so dearly value, frankly.
Yeah, you're a modest person.
No.
You come in great. There's
Was this all right for the
You did-
interview?
Yeah, you did real good.
No, I don't. Is this, are you over now? Is this all
Yeah,
right?
yeah, we're
but I-
done. Unless you want to say something, but we're done. What I'll end up doing here, let me
No.
turn it all off.
Well, no, but I don't want to
No, we're-
neglect to do what you wanted here. Was this adequate for you?
Yeah. Oh, you were great. You were great.
I didn't go on too much?
No, you were great. What I'll do too is it'll take me a week or two. I have to cut this and edit it
Wow.
and then load it and then I split it up.
You made sure you pressed record, right?
Oh yeah. That's another deal.
You can't forget that, Pat.
Oh, this equipment and everything, it's unbelievable. The amount of, oh, I know.
So how did you get as part of CMAC? How did you?
That was another deal.
Well,
I found these people.
No, but I mean, you're in like Flint here.